So this was a continuing on in part two of the sit-down lessons, as I mentioned in part one. So this is continuing in part two that, as I mentioned, the stock market has crashed once again for the second time as of March the 4th, 2024, because of the announcement of the economic tariffs goes into effect, targeting Mexico, Canada, and China as well too. For the past 2 days, the market's been reacting of the economic tariffs that have been taken in full effect, which hit Canada with 25% tariffs, and Mexico 25% tariffs, and China for 10 to 20% economic tariffs as well too. So this is going to continue to stir up economic trade wars between the nations. So once again, I'm getting to that Saint Mark, the third chapter, and this is this is the book of Saint Mark, chapter 3, verse 24. And if a kingdom be divided against itself, the kingdom cannot stand. Right, that's what we're seeing. Modern day kingdoms being divided against itself, that cannot stand. As we see in these latest economic wars and trade wars between the nations. St. Mark 3, verse 25. And if a house be divided against itself, that cannot stand. Right, so if a house be divided against itself, a house be divided cannot stand. And that's what we're seeing, especially with the modern day nations against nations, kingdom against kingdoms. So it's going to stir up more economic wars, more trade wars, more political wars, more tensions between the nations from an economical perspective. As I mentioned once again, the markets has crashed for the second time as of March the 3rd, all into March the 4th as well too. So if a kingdom be divided against itself, the kingdom cannot stand. And as we've seen these modern day kingdoms being divided against itself, especially from a political standpoint, geopolitical standpoint, from an economical perspective, and from a trade war perspective as well too. So these latest trade wars is definitely going to continue to increase between China versus the United States, and China versus Canada, and the United States versus Canada and Mexico and China. I meant to say, I want to reiterate that. So that's only going to stir up more economic trade wars, and that's going to affect the your everyday consumer, especially with these items and goods that both nations using slapping tariffs on one another, imposing tariffs on these nations towards one another. So these economic trade wars is definitely going to heat up at the Trump administration uh, use that announcement that goes into effect as of today and tomorrow as well too. The pushing of these economic tariffs, which is 25% on Canada and Mexico, and 10 to 12 to 20% on China as well too. So that's only going to stir up uh, more economic stir between the nations and trade wars. So China has used their economic sanctions on the United States on imports good, and Canada and Mexico did the same thing as well too. So that's gonna stir up more economic trade wars. So with that, this was just a part two of the sit down lesson. If I left off at part one, in part two of the prophecy updates as the March the 4th, 2025. So with that, I'd like to give all praises and glory and honor to Yahweh Hashem, Yahweh Shai Bahashem Akakadash, Barak Thumb, to the elders and apostles for Akim Akwath. Until next time, I would say Shalom.